Shemai, Koyana, to Heather and Tom, and everyone here, fellow presenters. As a poet, first and foremost, I always get a tinge of imposter syndrome and also a lot of joy from being invited to consider my work in a more academic discourse. And so the title of my talk here is Shorelines Can Be Witch Like That. Frankly, it was hard for me to choose only one water word to consider. My dreamscape, my work, my sanctuary are all surrounded by water. To the dreaded question of where is home, my answer is either in language or on the water. But shoreline, my word, feels right, even upon further reflection and upon hearing other responses, and even after learning recently about Tiffany Lethabo King's theory of shoals, a framework that encourages analyzing the liminal, unstable, offshore spaces of complexity where text, power, and histories intersect. Honestly, I'm kicking myself for not discovering that word and book sooner, so you should all check it out. As I identify, academically speaking, first and foremost, as poet, my scholarship and scholarly thinking are generally carried through the creative act, as I've used poetry to further invest in my relationship with my Supyak and Unangin relatives and ancestors in Alaska. I've also embraced an indigenous epistemology rooted in living relation and dynamic storytelling. The subjective experience cannot be dismissed, but nor can it hold in isolation, untouched, unchanged, unmoving. I preface my presentation this way because I think my position shapes my understanding of Blue Humanities itself as less a unidirectional way of applying the humanities to the marine world and more an invitation for reciprocal influence and exchange. How does the shoreline shape our understanding of humanities and being human? I also love when the world just gives me reaffirmation of things I'm thinking of. And so in preparing slides and preparing snippets of poems for this talk, I was teaching Helen of Egypt by H.D. in my feminist epic class, and this line struck me, this stanza rather. No matter, there is one law. As the tides are drawn to the shore, the lover draws the beloved as a magnet, a lodestone, a lodestar. Like a lover, attention to the shoreline demands a suspension of certainty, a space of encounter, possibility, and exchange. Just as our actions can affect and shape future shorelines, shorelines and traditions of subsistence can inform a reciprocal relationship between humans and the larger animal world. I've been drawn to the landscape of the shore as early as I can remember, despite growing up landlocked in Pennsylvania. My ancestral homelands in the Aleutian Islands and Alaskan Peninsula are sustained and defined by their shorelines. There's a saying Alutiiq elders have, when the tide goes out, the table is set. I think and work in my poetry in relation to place, displacement, and my Indigenous heritage, often through connections I make with words, phrases, and traditions I am learning, often through the Alutiiq Museum Word of the Week archive, which I have shown here. This is just one example of a word that will send me into a tangent of relational thinking. Through water, from line to line, I'm at once displaced and connected through the water. Forgive me for going perhaps a bit out of order, a bit non-linearly, but that's how my mind works. It mirrors patterns of activity and motion along the shoreline. But to the archive, a phrase that has resonated in my own work from this entry for beach, Arnat kutmi etut. The women are at the beach. I was going to just read an excerpt for time, but in revisiting the poem this line appears in at the end of my book, In the Current Where Drowning is Beautiful, the whole poem illustrates my thinking towards this notion of blue humanities more broadly and shorelines specifically. Letter to the daughter I would like to have. I still wake weeping after dreams of my grandmothers, wonder if they would like my small dog, what they would say to the cat. Don't ask how the dog knows each time I wake, regardless of my body's tendency to set hard when I think no daughter of mine shall weep for me. Fur fills my lungs till my own breath won't. Breathing is a costly act. I wish to return to sleep. My black-haired grandma didn't want to be a bother when she felt the water rising in her lungs. My mother's mother went into the earth in her finest leopard self. I want to build a boat, a body large enough to carry us all. These days, these waters not fit for wading, this mud hungers for our living. The blood stops in my veins, aware of every other body at rest and my threat to that state of ease. I would sooner let every other particle of dust, all the dirt and salty water, seal every opening, sooner let the fluid petrify in my womb than risk awaking others, but already are not kutmi etu ima quintot. We, the break in time. Shoreline for me is both point of anchor and point of departure, site of absence and of welcome, site of loss and site of return, site of yielding, whereas the line shifts records and remnants of past communities of people are exposed by rising tide lines and storm surges. It's a site of simultaneity and possibility. Anyone who knows me or follows me on Instagram, I promise it's not exciting, will know that I do indeed have a daughter. But when I wrote this poem, I believed very strongly I would not. For me, fortunately, that was a choice I could undo. But this poem, indeed this collection, at once precluded her existence and foresaw it. A Shoreline Poetics asks as much of our relationship to poetry as it does our relationship to vulnerable spaces of encounter. To dwell in uncertainty, to enter into a reciprocal relationship where we are as willing to listen and to learn and to be shown as we are to tell and teach and compel. Another poem in this collection plays with the fuzzy shine and ill definition of shorelines from out at sea. There is desire in that poem, but also danger, just as I am comforted on the water only so long as I remain near enough to shore. For me, returning to my indigenous community, despite the US government and Carlyle's best efforts, is fraught. Safe harbor is not assured, it is not taken. It is earned and it is given through good relations. As when our own paddlers would approach another people's shoreline and request permission to land upon the beach, and perhaps song would be exchanged. My community recovered a lost song from a Tlingit community from such an occasion, if memory serves me correct, but this is anecdotal information, so fuzzy with some shine, and not always privileged in a Western hierarchy of knowledge, and I must take care how I approach. And in parts of Alaska, when that tide goes out and the shoreline is unfixed, one can quickly be swallowed up in the mud flats. These too I claim as part of the shoreline. The shoreline invites vulnerability, and so too care. But the place where the water meets the land is a place for collecting and processing and storing and camping and watching and relaxing, for exchange, a place of both medicine and poison. From Joan Naviyuk Kane, who often writes from a similar landscape and whose work I have long adored. This is the first poem from her collection, Milk Black Carbon. Iridan, a coastline, a transitional place, bears evidence of others' dwelling. A house pit in the shape of a nest, another like a knife, a noose not lost in time, ours a useful relationship, though not a tight one. For between us we knew there was something to lose. Fragrant in June heat and a field of confusion, nothing like metaphor, moss campion, minute orchids, sweet, sweet vetch. A transitional place that bears evidence of others' dwelling. I truly believe poetry is a way of living and moving in this world that holds us accountable. In my poem above, I include the Suxtun Arnat Kutmi Etut from the archive, followed by Imak Quingdut. In this collection, I do provide translations in footnotes, unlike much of my other work, but they are not literal translations. They are not exact. They are translations of my dwelling in this language. At the beach, the women are waking. Shorelines, too, are capable of change, of being influenced by outside forces, and of influencing in their own right. In this way, shorelines are also spaces of reciprocity. I continue to go to the shoreline in my work, in my reading, in my dreamscape, not in search of solid ground, of ground that does not yield, but ground that gives underfoot, that responds to the currents that press upon it. That is the secret of the Supyak kayak, the built-in flex that enables it to withstand waves. I go to the shoreline to stand in the company of others, to be, as Kane writes further in that same book, denied the easy reach, instead by those seas increased, rephrased. Just the last stanza of that poem, those seas increased, might scour and reflect, those seas increased, rephrase us. Of course, I believe poetry itself can rephrase us, but I also firmly believe an epistemology informed by the dynamic quality of shorelines can foster a change in the directional equation of power between the human and the other. It is both the site of departure and return to our kin. A good faith engagement with poetry can foster a spirit of reciprocity and curiosity that is embodied in the shoreline and critical for our world at this point. And if a keen attention to the shoreline can reshape our own relationship to knowledge that guides action, a shoreline poetics reminds us too that the land is not static, not singular or inanimate or isolated. There's an Alutiiq tradition where one would go to the water, to the shoreline, to greet the day, to encounter the water and declare, I am aware. As the shoreline calls the tide, as we salvage there, so too does information and knowing come, rephrasing us through the signs by which we make meaning through encounter and relation. Koyana.